Sometime tomorrow, probably in the afternoon, maybe somewhere around 7. I will do a live stream on the greatest welterweight champions of all time, using particularly the criteria of who they faced, how many championship defenses they had, and how successful they were, and so on. So you guys are invited to join me. So it'll be probably around 7 p.m. tomorrow. Look out for it. This is Atlantic Standard Time. I believe we're 4 hours ahead of California, 1 hour ahead, I think, of New York, East Coast. So you can tune in then. So if some of you are in the Cali side, that would be 4 p.m. Those of you who are in New York side, that would be, wait a minute, I didn't say 8 p.m., I said 7. So that would be 3 p.m. in California. In New York, it would be 6 p.m. And depending on what part of the world you're in, you can look and see what time it is. But we'll be talking about this. Now, I don't got much more to say. You guys will also have your input. I'll also say my piece. I purposely started off with my piece and all the information that I have, because again, we just want to do it in a sort of structured way, breaking down the criteria that we're using, and then you can see that criteria in front of you, not just some arbitrary thing. Because I've noticed that a lot of guys, they talk about, the greatest welterweights of all time, whatever, but nobody lays out the criteria. I've seen Intangible Boxing, he would lay out some criteria, but again, the criteria that is laid out not necessarily is complete. And we're going to try and get as comprehensively, as complete as possible with the criteria that we look at in terms of the greatest welterweight champions of all time. Notice how specific my language is. So I'm talking mostly about when they become champion and their championship reign, or series of reigns, as is the case. So we look at it and look at the opponents they faced. Okay, so stay tuned. Friday, the 10th of September. Stay tuned for that. All right, guys. Now, this channel, once again, you can donate to it via Western Union or MoneyGram. You can also share these videos, subscribe, and you can also leave comments in the comment section below. You can even start it off. You can put down who you think are the greatest welterweight champions of all time, but give reasons. Don't just put in the comment section what your list is. Give reasons. In the case of this, I'm not talking about just the greatest welterweights. We're talking about the greatest welterweight champions. And we're going to keep it narrowed down to the welterweight division, what they did in the welterweight division in their championship reigns, okay, when they were champions. So that's how we're going to look at it. That's the best way to look at it in terms of narrowing down things, because you can't just, you can be all over the place and use all kinds of different things, but you want to kind of narrow it down a little bit. Now, some people say, well, that's kind of unfair because there were guys when they weren't champion, they were facing some really good names and stuff. Okay, so what we do in that case is we'll look at the greatest welterweights of all time. We could do that as well. That will be something separate, though. We're looking at the greatest welterweight champions of all time. And to be fair to each champion from whatever era they're in, we have to look at all of their opposition and who are the top guys of their day. And it's very important to understand what those fights were. So we'll actually go into a lot of detail on, not just that they won or they didn't win or it was disputable, but we'll also look at the actual fights as far as possible what took place in those fights. And the people, the opponents that they face. Because sometimes you can face, let's give a case with Floyd and Marquis. You can face a Hall of Fame opponent who did better in a lower weight class, for example. Right? So Floyd versus Marquis. Marquis was the lightweight world champion when he faced Floyd, right? And Marquis did very well. He did well featherweight, super featherweight, lightweight, and super lightweight. But he never was a world champion at welterweight. He never was. Now, if he had became a world champion at welterweight, that sort of, but he never really attained that. Not to say that he didn't do good things and great things at welterweight. He stopped Manny Pacquiao. He had a very close fight with Timothy Bradley. Almost became welterweight champion. But he didn't really quite reach there. So, that's an example. I can give you another example. The great Sugar Ray Robinson. I'm pulling some really big names here. These are the big name guys, right? The great Sugar Ray Robinson faced Sammy Angut. But Sammy Angut, again, the best he was able to do was he was a great lightweight champion. In fact, he faced Sammy Angut while he was lightweight champion 2 times. I think the 3rd time he wasn't a lightweight champion. And, sorry, yes, it was 3 times he faced him. Never stopped Sammy Angut, by the way. Tenacious fighter. But the thing is, if you look at Angut's performances, once he cleared out a lightweight and went to welterweight, his performances, he never really won fights. He was very competitive, but the top name guys, he never really beat them. Okay? And I'm just saying, these are important things to factor in when you're talking about welterweight fights in the welterweight division. So I'm just saying, right? Of course, Henry Armstrong faced, for example, Baby Arizmendi. Baby Arizmendi was a featherweight like Henry Armstrong, right? Moved up the ranks, and he actually faced Henry Armstrong, and Armstrong faced him at welterweight. So it's just these kinds of interesting things you have to look at as you're going through the history of fighters, and you're looking at their opposition. And Baby Arizmendi should be a Hall of Famer if he's not a Hall of Famer. But my point being that you have these, when you actually see the specific fights and what happened and how the fights panned out and stuff, it really makes more sense, because you're going to stick to the given era, whoever the person is. But more importantly, you want to look not just at the given era, you want to look at the actual fights themselves in that era, if you can get that information. So we're going to really go through it really in a lot of detail. And I like to set out the blueprint, because why I'm very interested in doing this, and how it can become educational to everybody, is that, and it calls for a lot of work, but nonetheless, is that you want to sometimes have a comprehensive idea, and not, we can be like fans, for example, and just be fanboys of whatever fighter we are fanboys of, but at the end of the day, we're not really going deep into it. But I want to take a much more deeper dive and evaluate fighters, not just based on their skill sets, what they did in fights in the ring, but also the situations, the context behind these fighters facing each other, and who were the opponents they were facing, and what kind of opponents were they, and what were the conditions under which they were facing them. So we really want to take a nice deep dive into that, and sort of, because we've not been in an era, that's another thing. You can't really be that comprehensive when you've not been of that era. You know what I mean? And not because only you don't know what it felt like to be in those fights and in those times, but also, in addition to that, having a lack of knowledge of what you could do in boxing. Like today, we would look back at somebody 60 years ago, 80 years ago, and say, hey, they didn't do this. And you can see the fighters at that time didn't know the knowledge about this, right? But at the time, in that era, you viewing that from the lens of knowledge you have, it would have been groundbreaking. It would have been tremendous. You couldn't see anybody beating these people, and so on and so on. So, there are certain things that we just can't recapture, and we can't harness in to get the full sort of impact. But what we can do is we can be fair by looking at the person with the opposition that they had in their time. All right. So I hope that that makes some sense. We'll go into some context, and we'll go into a lot of detail. We'll also examine everything with a fine-tooth comb as we comb through. And again, I will invite people to come on the show and also express their feelings. I know a lot of people assume a lot of things about boxing. If you haven't boxed before, there's a lot about boxing that you're going to assume, and you're going to be wrong about it. Okay. So I'm going to come back with another video, my last video for tonight, but I just thought I would leave that with you guys. So tomorrow, 7 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, which will be like 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to look at the greatest welterweight champions of all time. And so stay tuned, be there. We'll go through some information, and hopefully it'll put things in context. Now, I'm using welterweight division obviously because of Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, which are such big names in the sport today. But then we also have Errol Spence, and we have Terrence Crawford, who look like they're the two powerhouses in the division as well. So I'm actually going to take Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence and put them inside of that equation as well, so you guys can look at it and evaluate them and what they've done so far, and see how that matches up with some of the all-time greats that are, in the welterweight division. So, chop chop.